Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
Several years ago, there was a best-selling book called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and It's All Small Stuff. And it was about learning to calm down and not make mountains out of molehills, which, by the way, is great. And despite all the hoopla and attention given to these big, over-the-top marriage proposals that have to be up on YouTube for everybody to see, grand gestures aren't what keeps a marriage healthy and successful. It's actually the small gestures that you make each and every day that provide the glue necessary for a truly happily ever after marriage. So paying attention to some small stuff really does matter. And so to talk about a few things that can make all the difference in your marriage, I'm joined by blogger, fellow wife, and fellow mom, Leah Hefner. So, Leah, thanks so much for being on the show to talk about this from a really practical, personal perspective.
Oh, well, thanks. That's a big compliment. I really appreciate that. Praise God. All right, cool.
So, part of it, I find my guests all over the place, and a lot of places that I look, is I read other bloggers. I read what other people are having to say about marriage. And you recently wrote an article called 3 Simple Things You're Forgetting in Your Marriage that I actually found to be quite profound. So before we get into talking about those individual things, I thought we might talk about that forgetting part. And, I've been married for 31 and a half years, been with my husband for 32 and a half.
Congratulations. Yay.
Yeah, I can live to tell about it. And, and I'm always amazed by the things that people forget. And sometimes I'm actually really appalled because doing what I do for a living as a marriage coach, some of the things that people say to each other, it's like, oh my gosh, this is the person you promised to love and honor and cherish until death, and you're not very honoring because those words would never come out of my mouth. So, but I think we tend to forget. So, what was that like for you, and why is it important?
Oh man, that's a really good question, and I don't know that there's a point in time that I could say like, oh, I forgot at this day, and then, oh, I remembered at this day. I think the reality of all parts of life is that as we move into different seasons, things look different. And so unless we are intentional, the things that are the most important don't go with us. Actually, my husband and I were just talking about this, I think at breakfast this morning or maybe at dinner last night, and I can't remember which one it was because I forget, we were just talking about how that's a true thing in the Bible too. So like we were reading to our kids out of Luke, and we were doing where Peter denies Jesus, and we're like, Jesus tells Peter that he's going to deny him, and Peter's like, I would never do that. And then all the things happen in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then Peter denies Jesus, and then he's like, oh yeah, I just remembered that Jesus said that already. And I was like, how often does this happen? That like we know this thing, it's right there in front of us. And then life happens, and it feels crazy, and then the natural consequence of whatever happens, and then we're like, oh yeah, I remember that. Oh shoot. And so, like, I saw that played out in my own marriage when, when things started changing, when we got into a hard and busy season, and then I realized that like those words that I was using, those honoring words, those cherishing words, weren't coming out of my mouth easily, and I had to like work on rewiring those to make those the basis again, the remembered things instead of the forgotten things.
Right, because it's really interesting, and sometimes I wonder if it's really a question of forgetting as opposed to maybe possibly getting a little complacent and lazy. Because, I talk about, the please and thank you, magic words that we teach our kids, except sometimes we forget to say those to our life partners. And, as I tell people, I don't need my husband to thank me every day for dinner, but I'm really glad that he notices that, the dinner doesn't just magically appear on the kitchen table. Not only did I make the dinner, but I also usually went out and bought the food, and then I also need to remember to thank him for providing that opportunity for us to be able to, pretty much buy the kinds of food we want to have and that I can fix. And it's, and I think it's really easy to get really complacent in this whole, I guess, familiarity breeds contempt, and the whole, taking each other for granted that, you're just always going to be here, and I don't really need to make that the effort that we usually do when we first meet, or maybe in our first, in the first wonderful years of being together as a couple. Does that resonate in any way?
Well, yes, I will give you complacent for sure. But I think maybe 7 years in with 4 little kids, sometimes I'm so tired. Or not just physically tired, but mentally tired. I answer, a million questions a day. Same thing. I get the food, I make the food, I do the nap times, and I'm not saying that my husband's not involved in those things, because he totally is. But there's a lot going on, and I realized at this about when I started realizing that I was forgetting these things that were just basic things to our relationship, was when I realized that my mental and emotional capacity was too full. I think a lot of times that we look at the calendar and we say, hey, I have room for these activities because my time slots are not filled up yet. And for me, I've learned that my time slots fill up a lot. There's a lot of time slots empty on my calendar when my brain and my heart are too full. And I need to honor what my brain and my heart are saying. So sometimes that is swinging the opposite way. Sometimes that is I am vegged out on the couch. I am being lazy in the physical keeping of my home, the actual keeping of relationships. And sometimes that is the opposite end. I am burned out, touched out, tapped out, and I don't know how to tap into being intentional without that muscle memory to kind of carry me to do this activity. Same thing with, that idea with anything. The more you do it, the more that you want to do it, and the less that you do it, the less that you want to do it. When I get to the point of less, then I have to be let's kick this into gear, and that's on either side of the spectrum, whether that's because I'm tapped out or because I'm just choosing not to engage that way.
Well, and I find that a really interesting perspective because, of course, the badge of honor we're all wearing these days is about how busy we are. And, and I actually talk with some of my clients because it's almost well, I can't just sit there. And it's why not? And it's well, because I'm not being productive. And I said, so recharging your batteries isn't being productive? I mean, how many of us would drive around with our cars on empty? I mean, if we drove around with our cars on empty, they'd stop. I mean,
right, exactly.
Yep. So we have to go fill them up. And, and the idea that we pack every possible moment of our day, and then something's going to slide.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of times what slides, especially when we have small children, and thank goodness mine are pretty much fully grown. So there's hope, people. There's hope. But, especially when we have small children who require, attention. And it's hard sometimes to figure that out, and I always talk about trying to find balance because I hate the concept, I really detest the phrase, work-life balance, because work is part of life. I kind of look at it as work-home balance or personal, but it's finding a way to really balance all those things.
And really what's balance implies that it's equal, that work is equal to our home life, is equal to this. And for us, as we've kind of gone through this, and this is totally, something that we've learned by the grace of God, a book that we read, and something that we really respect in this area was do you want your work life at the center and your family around that, or do you want your family life at the center and your work around that? And that impacted us so profoundly that we're yeah, we need to think about how that looks. And it's not as simple as it's 50-50 all the time. It's a dance that we're doing all the time to say, if our family is our priority, what does this look like? Yes, we absolutely still have to eat, and we have to have a place to live, and we have to pay our bills, and we have to drive places. So, like, what's our balance, and how does it work for our family, and what does that look like?
Well, and I love that concept about that it's not a 50-50, and balance doesn't necessarily mean equal, but you also brought to mind that saying, that how many people on their deathbed say, I wish I'd spend more time at the office.
Right.
It's always about the connection. It's always about the people. So now that we've kind of covered the forgetting part, I want to head right into these three simple things that people are forgetting. And so what is the first one that tends to get forgotten?
The first one I wrote about was looking somebody in the eyes, looking each other in the eyes when you're having a conversation. I admitted to my husband yesterday that I have a hard time making eye contact with people, partly because when I'm out, I have 4 kids and I'm head counting, and partly because I spend a lot of time professionally, and because we don't live close to family, on my phone or on my computer and looking down. I'm either on the phone with somebody or I'm typing on the computer, and there's no eye contact involved in that. And so I found myself having a hard time making eye contact with people when I am able to. And I noticed that with my husband. We went out for our anniversary last year, and we didn't take any phones or anything like that. And I looked him in the eyes for the entire day, and I kept thinking, wow, his eyes look different than the last time I did this. How long has it been since I've spent time looking him in the eyes? Right. And then I was like, oh my goodness, it's been a while. It must be a while if it's changed this much.
Well, and it seems like, again, especially, you said you specifically didn't take, phones or whatever on to your anniversary dinner, which always stuns me by the number of people, not just couples, but also mothers and daughters. And, my daughter and I have done this when we've gone out to lunch, and we don't spend the time looking at our phones. We actually spend the time talking to each other, and we're always looking around at other mothers and daughters going, they're both on their phones, or even young couples today, they spend their time texting each other as opposed to put down the phone, look at each other, have a conversation.
Yeah.
But what is it about specifically? Because looking directly into some people's eyes, that's incredibly personal and can be very, very uncomfortable. So is that what makes it so important?
Well, I guess I can't. I don't know if I feel comfortable like broad stroking this, but I think part of that is there's a vulnerability of looking somebody in the eyes. You look somebody in the eyes, and you can tell a lot more about what they're thinking, what they're feeling. You're paying attention, not just their eyes, but you're paying attention to what their whole body and their whole face is saying when you're looking them in the eyes. And that gives you a lot more context into what they're saying behind what their words are saying. I can say the exact same words a bunch of different ways, but my face is going to tell you a lot about what those words mean to me. Is this something that's important to me? Am I excited about this? Am I sad about this? And so having that willingness to look somebody in the eyes and have that vulnerability with them, I think it is part of what makes it so important.
Well, I think it goes back to the old adage about windows, or I saw the eyes of the windows to the soul. And you're right. It's really hard to hide thoughts, emotions. If you're actually looking into each other's eyes,
exactly.
There's no hiding place, and I think that's one of the things that's scary about it, but also one of those things that really connects us. And it is kind of a example of trust. I'm trusting you, and you're trusting me, and we're actually connecting on that deeper level.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I'm trusting you with my peace, with my vulnerability here that I'm giving you. I'm trusting you with the feelings that I have while we're making eye contact, that you can have them and that I can trust you with them.
Yeah. So this is Happily Ever After is just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Leslie Dories, and I'm talking with blogger, fellow wife and mother Leah Hefner about how it's the little things that we do in marriage that will determine its success. So if you feel disconnected from your spouse, it might be because some of the small but really important loving behaviors have fallen by the wayside. And if you'd like help reconnecting with your spouse, then I encourage you to take action right now.